Hi, everyone. This is Marc Bates. This is the Rabbit Room Apologetics Podcast. Thanks for joining. So last time we were talking about hermeneutics and the obstacles to understanding, right? A couple things came up here that I'd like to address. Some people asked about. Where do I get my knowledge from that I'm trying to share with you? And what are some of the ways that they can enhance what they're doing? So the first thing is, I've spent, like I said, well over 20 years teaching this stuff, right? And going to seminary and attending seminary classes and reading books and writing articles for different magazines over those 20 years. So I've got a lot of that academic background in there, several degrees and stuff. But a lot of the stuff is just coming from, having taught it and interacted with people for a great deal. Now, one of the things I keep talking about, though, is this Logos Bible study, which is here off to the side, and why I think this is such a great study tool for you. So what I want to do here is just highlight something for you. So this is the Logos sign-up plan. You can see on their subscription, you don't have to do the subscription, but it really is not that expensive. They have the three options, Premium, Pro, and Max, but you see the Premium is at $7.50 a month. Normally it's $10 a month. It's on sale right now. And like I said, you do get additional discount with my little link. It's a couple bucks. Hey, why not, right? But what I like is the subscription gives you access to a lot of tools that they detail here. And so if you just go to logos.com or click my link so you get the discount, you'll see that it comes with data sets, which they identify here, interlinear Bibles, other Bibles, teaching and preaching tools, original language tools, right? Media, and 250 books initially. It goes up 500, 600 books. And on top of this, you can get what they call the libraries. The libraries are based upon denominations that you might potentially want to get a bunch of books based on that denomination. You can add a lot of books. And over time, this is a great investment in your biblical education. So just think about that. Once again, you don't have to have Logos. I just think it's the best tool available for getting into this thing. So we're going to go there. Now, the other thing is, as far as education, without taking seminary classes, one of the things that Logos has are these, we'll call them seminary light type classes, things that you can get. These are called mobile education courses. And so one of them here is by Michael Heiser, one of my favorite academics, introducing biblical interpretation. And a lot of what I started with here came from this course. We were talking about obstacles to interpretation and how meaning is not self-evident. And then you have, and just in terms of biblical interpretation hermeneutics, I own that one, Principles of Interpretation. This one here is introducing literary interpretation, right? Problems in biblical interpretation, difficult passages. We got difficult passages too, and so on down the line. And a lot of the ideas I present to you, I got from books, from courses, and I got from a lot of these guys here. Problems in biblical interpretation. One I really like is, hold on here, The Story of the Bible, right? By Michael Guhin. Guhin's a fantastic academic. And we're talking here about, in his introduction, what is he talking about and what's he looking for. And this is a great book to just understand basic ideas, okay? But one of the things I really like, this is one of the books that I got the whole idea of the fact that the original books need to be read in their context. That came from Dr. Heiser as well. He stresses that greatly. But the idea is that if you don't understand it in context, right, it's really hard to understand what the authors were intending, right? And so then we got Old Testament exegesis, and these are just the ones I own right now that had some connection to hermeneutics. I own several hundred of these courses, but they're all there. You can access them individually. One of the more advanced of the subscriptions gives you, I think it's 4 or 5 of the mobile education courses every quarter that you get to study as part of the subscription. I think that's just absolutely a great deal. The other area you might want to look at, there are a couple places online. ChristianCourses.com offers some educational content that you can get into. And then Awakening School of Theology. They used to ask for a small donation per class, but now there are 40 plus courses on there. Very solid stuff. And because they've been granted a good operational budget from some very key donors, they now offer for free. Of course, they do request that if you can give them some money, I do give them a monthly donation to help them keep running, because I enjoy their work and I send people there all the time. So Awakening School of Theology, you might try that, and once again, you get a lot of theological training for free with them. So there's lots of sources out there. What I try to do is bring all that, my years of experience, all the education I've taken, and all the stuff that's out there. I try to bring it and distill it to you in a simple, finite way that you can understand easily, and then expand upon that. All right, so we talked about problems with interpretation and the intended meaning. Now, Dr. Heiser and several other academics point to basically 10 areas that we need to be concerned with in terms of understanding that. And so the first of those areas, let me just get here to notes. This is how your presuppositions get in the way of biblical understanding. Okay? So here's our point. Interpreters always stand on assumptions, and we all do, right? Theological, philosophical, cultural, or methodological. That predisposes them to see certain meanings and ignore others. So Dr. Heiser, and this all came from this first book here, The Introduction to Biblical Interpretation, or this first course, talks about how these things do point us. So, and I talked about last time about the fact that like Luther's interpretations are all really based on his fight with the Roman Catholic Church and some of the things that were going on in his time. And he saw everything in light of that. Okay? So your presuppositions are something that potentially get in the way of what it means, right? And so why does this matter? Well, text does not speak in a vacuum. So if you begin with an unexamined doctrinal grid, right, then that breaks potentially your ability to interpret it outside of that grid, right? And this came from the unseen realm. So for those of us who talk about and believe in what's called the DCW, or Divine Council worldview, talks a lot about how there are divine beings that God created that are part of the Bible, and we see that in a lot of Bible verses. And a lot of the later, and when I say later, I'm talking, people who lived in the 16th, 17th centuries maybe, or even the 15th and 14th and 15th centuries, had this predisposition to try and take the supernatural out of the Bible, right? And so this passage here, Genesis 6:1-4, which talks about the sons of God, right? In that later time, and this is really predominant in that Reformation theology group, they demystifies this, and they say that these sons of gods really were the sons of Seth, potentially, right? In the Bible. And even though the passage really seems to say something, and when you're doing your biblical interpretation, sons of God in Hebrew is a phrase, B'nai Elohim, right? Elohim, of course, is God, and Benai, that is the sons, right? And you only see this reference to what we'll call divine or spiritual type beings that are not humans, right? And so these sons of God who came down, saw human daughters of man, right? The daughters of man were beautiful, and they cohabitated with them, and thus were born the fallen ones, right? The Nephilim. Well, if you go back even 50 or 60 years, most of the commentaries in those days, from that day and from, let's say, about 1000 to 1100, we're all talking about how these were not angels or anything that came down from heaven, but these were the sons of Seth, and the mighty men of old were just, good warriors. But the Second Temple period, right? And that's the period from about 400 years before Christ through Christ and the destruction of the Second Temple. Well, they definitely had a predisposition that this represented human people. So when you're reading this passage, understanding the worldview of the people of the author and of the people who are reading it, this should be read as spiritual, divine, in the sense that they are not mortal, right? Beings who come and do this. And in fact, one of my hypotheses, and we covered this in the section on Genesis, is that the sin was not necessarily Adam's, but it was the sin of the divine being who showed up, who was called the serpent in Genesis 1 or Genesis 3, who entices Eve to eat from the fruit of the tree. Talking snakes are not natural, right? And this talking snake enters into God's temple. Essentially, the Garden of Eden is a temple. So this is not like just some normal snake. This is something big, and that's where the origin of sin really starts, is with this break here, and that's a break from a divine being who breaks God's intention, right, and helps man, sin. So you gotta get away from that, and this helps keep everything clean. And there are a lot of passages that talk about the divine counsel and how we need to work with that, and that's why it's important to keep the author's intention in mind here, right? There are other people who talk about this a great deal. Kevin Van Hooser is a very big one who talks about ethical responsibility to the author, that the reader, us, must bring interpretive habits that either honor or we betray the author's communicative intentions, right? N.T. Wright, and you may have heard of him, a very famous modern writer as well. He emphasizes historical horizon work, which is trying to reconstruct the author's world so we can view it from that presuppositional viewpoint, right? So these all help in your ability to interpret the text properly. So we have 5 things that you can think about doing to help break your presuppositions, right? Before you read a targeted passage, write down 3 commitments you bring: theological, a philosophical, and scientific, right? From a theological perspective, I'm looking for Christ in this one. From a philosophical perspective, I'm looking, to better understand something. From a scientific perspective, potentially, I'm looking for this. I mean, it doesn't have to be just these 3. It could be anything you're looking for. But what are you looking for here? Write down 2 or 3 commitments you're looking for from in this text. Read the passage once for a surface sense. Now, there are rules, or not rules, there are ways of reading that really help you gain a sense of this. And so I typically like to read either full chapters, or a chapter from a book or from the Bible, a chapter in the Bible. I like to read, or papers, right? So there are several people all the way back to at least the first reference I've got of being written down very fully was from Benjamin Franklin on how to read with understanding. But that there were philosophers throughout history have been explaining how to get the most out of written material. And so what I do is don't just read it, right? Even a surface read, don't read it quickly. I actually like to read the final chapter, especially if you're reading like a paper or something, or even in the Bible. You read the final paragraph, because that usually summarizes what the intent of that entire chapter was for, right? Read the final paragraph. Then read the first paragraph, because that kind of introduces the players and what's going on. And then very quickly go through and read like the first sentence of every paragraph in the chapter. And that reinforces the story. And then go ahead and give it a quick read to fill in the holes. But that helps anchor what this chapter is about in your head. And we want to do that, right? So when I say surface read, I don't mean just a quick read. I mean, get it without trying to figure out your interpretation yet, but get the surface sense in. Then reread it asking, if I set my commitments aside, what options does the passage actually allow? So you may have thought, hey, I'm looking for, how do I handle a Muslim who's attacking Christianity in my workplace, right? Well, that just may not be in the text, okay? And so that could be an apologetic commitment you're bringing to this, and that just may not be there at the moment for you. So you can set certain things aside and say, okay, that doesn't fit the text we're reading, right? Once you've done that, right, so you're confirming that the commitments you're trying to get from the text are there, right? Then you recover the ancient horizon. Go back and try to figure out what the ancient Israelite or first century Jewish assumptions were with the writing, because even the New Testament was written by first century Jews, right? These are not modern Christians. They weren't Luther. They weren't, Augustine and all that. So what were their assumptions reading this, right? And test your initial commitments against that horizon and how many of those actually fit, and maybe you need to adjust that. Then finally, redeclare your interpretive confidence, high, medium, low, and list the evidence that raised or lower it, right? So now, in terms of interpreting this passage or this chapter, I have a high, medium, or low confidence, and this is why I have a high, medium, and low confidence in my interpretation. And you can use that, because we're going to reread stuff. And you want to go back and dig deeper and learn more and get closer with the text. And it really does help to take notes. And one of the things I do like about the Logos Bible study is as I'm reading stuff, I can take notes. I can store it in the text. Or I can, be talking and recording notes on my computer and then feed that back into the system to store it. The whole idea here is to give you that ability to go back and really internalize the text. And I've changed the way I think about certain passages over time, and I'm sure you will too. So take that in, use those as guidelines for reading. So the first thing that we want to do, though, we have 10 things that we want to get rid of, and presuppositions, we want to try and minimize them as much as possible. We want to understand where they come from in terms of our background and history and what we bring to the text. Try to set them aside as much as possible and read the text for what it was meant to be from the author and from the original readers, and then take that into an interpretive interplay where we internalize the text so that we know what it means to us and how we can talk to people about it. Okay, hope that helped. Leave me questions if you have any questions that you want, some guidance on where you want to go with this. I'm going to go through these 10 items, and then we'll deal with other things later. But we're going to start with this whole idea of how do we actually interpret the Bible and work for ourselves, and be blessed. Also, if you haven't done so, think about liking and subscribing liking this video and subscribing to the channel. It does help the channel out, and I appreciate that. Share this with a friend who maybe you're in a Bible study with, and you want to say, hey, let's start really digging deep into stuff. Right? A lot of Bible studies can be, especially small groups from church, can be very superficial in the way they handle the text. And I want you to get really in depth. So let's get really in depth with this stuff. And it really helps to have a Bible study partner sometimes on that stuff. So think about that and share it with them. And also, I mentioned it before, there is a discount code in the description for the Logos. If you like the Logos idea on what we've got here, go ahead and look at it. In order, like I said, I've been using it for well over 20 years. It's a great Bible study tool, and it is not very expensive at all in real terms anymore. So take a look into it and let me know what you have, and be blessed. Remember, God is good all the time.